I'm Rosa Kippen, 34, and I built a stable life from scratch after losing my dad young. For years, I let my mom and stepdad live in the house I inherited, covered the costs, stayed quiet, kept the peace. But when I overheard them laughing on a call about taking it from me once I was gone, I made a decision that changed everything. Ever been blindsided by someone you trusted completely? Tell me your story in the comments, because you're not the only one. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to choose yourself after being taken for granted, hit like and subscribe for more true stories about boundaries and quiet justice. What came next still catches people off guard. My name is Rosa. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the person everyone counted on, but rarely looked at twice. The responsible daughter. The one who shows up on time, remembers birthdays, fills the fridge, fixes the messes. It started young. When I was 9, my dad died in a highway accident. It was sudden, ugly, and left behind more paperwork than closure. My mother remarried 2 years later, a man named Richard, who never tried to be a father figure and never really had to. Mom was loud, dazzling, full of drama. He just let her be the sun and orbited accordingly. I learned early that being useful was safer than being emotional. We lived in the same split-level suburban house my parents had bought when I was a toddler. Beige siding, overgrown hedges, rust on the mailbox. After my dad passed, it technically became mine. Not right away, of course. There were lawyers, a life insurance policy, and a trust. When I turned 25, I got access to the full deed. But no one really talked about that. Not even me. By that point, Mom and Richard had been living there continuously, never paying rent. I'd stayed in the city after college, studio apartment, cheap furniture, long hours. I was building something. But every other weekend I'd drive back, fix a leaky faucet, mow the lawn, update their Wi-Fi, replace appliances when they broke. I never made them sign anything. I never asked for anything formal. I just told myself I was doing the right thing. The mature thing. Family matters more than money. And maybe if I kept showing up, kept being the one who handled things, they'd finally see me not just as the help, but as someone who mattered. When I got promoted at work, I told Mom over the phone. She said, "That's great, honey. Hey, do you know anyone who can fix the water heater? Ours is making a weird noise." When I bought my first car outright, no financing, no cosigner, I parked it in their driveway and she said, "Can you help us get a new oven next month? Ours is ancient." She called me a blessing, but only when she needed something. "We're lucky to have you," she'd say, and then remind me she was going to Europe with Richard for their anniversary. I'd nod, check their flights, water the plants while they were gone, and feel that familiar knot tighten in my chest. Over the years, I paid for everything in that house short of groceries. I covered roofing repairs after a bad storm, paid the property taxes every spring, updated the kitchen when Mom said the old one made her depressed. And when they planned a trip to Italy, one of those package tours with matching suitcases and tourist badges, I surprised them with an upgraded hotel in Florence. I put it on my card. She cried on the phone, said I was so thoughtful, then asked if I could also cover the airport transfer. They started referring to the house as ours. Sometimes our house, sometimes our home. I didn't correct them. Not when she talked about paint colors. Not when they held barbecues in the backyard with their friends from church. Not when Richard told someone at a family wedding, "We're thinking of remodeling the downstairs bathroom. It's our place, might as well make it comfortable." I told myself it didn't matter. That legal documents spoke louder than dinner party small talk. But deep down, I think I wanted them to feel safe. I thought that if I gave them enough, created enough stability, they'd finally return something: respect, gratitude, maybe even love. It never came. But I kept trying. Every time my mother told me she was proud of me, it was followed by a request. "You always have your life so together. Can you help us refinance?" Or, "You're so good at organizing, would you mind sorting out our tax papers?" I stopped expecting the calls to be just about me. There were no "how are yous" unless they led to "can yous." I paid attention to those patterns, but I didn't speak them aloud. That would have made things uncomfortable. And if there's one thing my mom couldn't tolerate, it was discomfort. Once, during a casual brunch, my stepdad joked that they were living like royalty in Rosa's castle. Everyone laughed. Even me. But I remember staring at the plate of eggs in front of me, trying to swallow a growing sense of dread. Like maybe the whole arrangement wasn't funny anymore. Maybe it never was. A few years ago, I found a small stack of printed photos in Mom's kitchen drawer. Pictures from a recent trip to Spain. In one, she and Richard stood in front of a sprawling vineyard. The caption on the back read, "Living our best life. Grateful for what we've built." Not what I gave them. Not what Rosa's provided. Just what they had built. I stood there for a long time holding that photo. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. I just put it back and washed the dishes in the sink, which had been sitting there for days. Looking back, I'm not sure what I thought would change. I told myself I was keeping the peace. That being the quiet provider was a noble thing. That being invisible was the price of stability. But the truth is, I was hoping that all the silent giving would buy me some piece of their affection. That one day, they'd look around that house and see me, not just the work I did or the bills I paid, but me. That day never came. And when I finally heard what they really thought, it all made sense. Every dismissal, every request, every time they let me be the one who carried the load without ever asking if I was tired. They didn't see me as strong. They saw me as convenient. A safety net. A silent wallet. A burden they were waiting to outlive. But that part comes later. For now, all you need to know is this. I gave them everything. Time, money, care, a home. I let them believe it was theirs. And I never asked for anything in return. Until I did. It started subtly, just enough to make me second-guess myself. They were always planning something. First it was New Orleans for Richard's birthday. Then a long weekend in Banff. Then the Caribbean cruise. I didn't mind it at first. I figured they'd earn some fun, and I was the one covering the property taxes anyway, so what did it matter if the backyard got neglected for a week or two? But somewhere along the way, the tone changed. Texts started going unanswered. I'd message to ask if the plumber ever showed. Silence. A day later, I'd follow up. Still nothing. Then I'd get a photo of a cocktail from some beach, no caption, no context. I'd call to ask about mail piling up on the porch. Richard would pick up and hand the phone off after 3 sentences, or say, "We're just about to head into dinner," before I could get to the point. That used to be rare. Now it was every time. I remember one weekend when I came by to fix a loose railing on the back steps. It was pouring. I'd brought tools, wore an old hoodie, and spent 2 hours getting soaked while they were off wine tasting. Their neighbor, Gloria, came out from her porch with an umbrella and said, "I hope you're not doing all that for free. Your parents are lucky to have you." I didn't correct her. I smiled and said something about how it needed to be done anyway. She smiled back. "Well, I told your mom she and Richard are so blessed to have that house. I'd kill for a setup like that." I blinked. She said it was hers? Gloria laughed, like it was obvious. "Oh, she calls it her forever home. Said they're thinking about turning your room into a hobby studio now that you're long gone." I nodded politely. Kept smiling. Inside, my jaw clenched. That wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that, but it was the first time it hit me differently. My room. A guest room. Something to be used once I was out. A week later, I brought it up gently over the phone. Asked if they wanted to discuss the house officially, just go over the paperwork, make sure everything was clear. There was a pause, then laughter. "Oh, don't get technical, sweetheart," Mom said. "This is family. No need to get all legal on us." When I pressed again, she changed the subject. "By the way, I found this gorgeous mirror at an estate sale. It would look stunning in the entryway. Think you could Venmo me for it?" I already put it on my card. That was the pattern. Every time I tried to set a boundary or even clarify facts, she'd redirect. Flatter me. Ask for something. The message was clear, be useful, not complicated. Things got worse before I realized they had. They started traveling for longer stretches. A week became 10 days. Then 2. Then they booked a 3-week Europe trip. London, Paris, Florence. "We've always wanted to do it right," she said. "Now that the house is finally settled, it just feels like the right time." I asked what settled meant. She brushed it off. You know what I mean. It just feels like ours now. They didn't ask if I needed anything before they left. No, can you check the mail? Or do you mind keeping an eye out for packages? Just a typed-out list for the gardener, which they forwarded with no greeting. It read like a task sheet for an employee. Waterfront hedges twice. Please keep squirrels out of planters. Extra seed bags in the shed. No thank you. No signature. Just instructions. That was the trip that changed everything. The day before they left, I called and asked if we could talk about some financial logistics, maybe review the taxes together. I'd handled the last 2 years alone. I wanted to make sure they understood where the money was going. Mom sounded rushed. Oh, Rosa, we're just about to finalize the packing. Can it wait? Maybe when we're back? Sure, I said. But I think it's important. Everything's fine. You worry too much. She hung up without saying goodbye. They left the next morning. I found out through Instagram. A photo of them at the airport, matching neck pillows, champagne in hand. Caption: off to our second honeymoon. Cheers to living life fully. I didn't hear from them for 21 days. Not one text. Not one check-in. I reached out twice during the second week, once about an HOA notice, once about a mild roof leak I spotted during a storm. No reply. Not even a thumbs up. When they finally resurfaced, it was through a group email blast with 20 photos from a vineyard in Tuscany. Subject line: trip of a lifetime. I stared at the screen, rereading the captions. Can't wait to retire here someday. This feels like home. I wasn't mentioned once. The house wasn't mentioned once. It was like I'd disappeared. Like I'd never existed in the structure they were living in, benefiting from, calling their own. That weekend, I drove out. Not to confront them, just to check the property. Something in me needed to see it. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal. Lawn trimmed. Mail collected. But something felt off. I walked inside. Their bedroom door was open. On the dresser were 2 real estate brochures. Both featured cottages in France. I flipped one open. Notes in Mom's handwriting. Circles. Stars. Ideal layout. Perfect for early retirement. I took a photo. Put it back. Before I left, I walked into the guest room, formerly mine. They'd painted it. New art. Fresh bedding. The bookshelf was gone, replaced by a sewing machine and racks of fabric. I closed the door quietly. Sat on the front porch for a long time. Not angry, just tired. I was starting to see what had been true for years, but hadn't registered until now. They had rewritten the story. In their version, the house belonged to them. I was a footnote. A helpful character who made things run smoothly in the background. I wasn't family. I was infrastructure. That night, I made a list. Utilities. Mortgage history. Tax receipts. Every major expense I'd covered for the last 9 years. And then I printed the deed. My name. Alone. Top line. No ours. No we. Just mine. They still had 2 weeks left in Europe. Plenty of time. And suddenly, I knew exactly how I wanted to spend it. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those bland, ordinary days where nothing feels urgent until suddenly, everything does. I was at my apartment, trying to finish a project before the end of the week. My phone lit up with Mom's name. I answered immediately. Hey, I said. Everything okay? She must have pocket-dialed me. I could hear background noise, silverware clinking, muffled voices, what sounded like music playing faintly. Then her laugh cut through the static. That full, easy laugh she saved for dinner parties and holiday gossip. I mean, come on, she said. She's a burden. My hand froze on the keyboard. She went on, her tone casual, almost breezy. She's never going to settle down. Always hovering, always checking in. I told Richard, just give it time. Once she's gone, we'll finally have the place to ourselves. Gone. Like I was temporary. Richard chimed in, his voice distant but clear enough. She acts like it's her house. But legally or not, we've made it ours. I'm not losing sleep over it. Then her again, softer now. She won't fight us. She never has. They both laughed. I sat completely still, phone still against my ear, heartbeat so loud I could barely hear the rest. I don't even know how long the call lasted. Eventually, she must have realized and hung up, because the line went dead without warning. But by then, I wasn't listening anymore. I lowered the phone slowly, placed it on the carpet beside me, and just stared at the floor. No tears. No anger. Just clarity. It was like hearing your own name on a list you weren't supposed to see. Not screamed, not slandered, just crossed out. Removed. A non-factor. She hadn't said, Rosa's been difficult. She hadn't said, we need space. She'd said burden. As if my presence was something to endure. As if everything I'd done, years of effort, care, sacrifice, was a weight they were planning to shed the second I slipped up or stepped aside. I don't know how long I stayed sitting there. 20 minutes, maybe more. The light changed outside. My tea went cold. Eventually, I picked up the phone again. Not to call her back. That wouldn't have mattered. I knew how that would go. She'd laugh it off, say I misunderstood, say I was overreacting. Maybe even cry if I pushed hard enough. That script was worn thin. Instead, I called my realtor. Her name was Vanessa. We'd met 6 months earlier when I helped a friend look for a condo. At the time, I wasn't planning anything. But I remembered how sharp she was. How calm. The kind of person who didn't waste words. I'm ready, I told her. She didn't ask what I meant. Just said, let's get the paperwork started. I spent the next 48 hours gathering every relevant document, utility bills, inspection reports, HOA records. I forwarded her copies of the title, the deed, the mortgage history. She sent back a market analysis that made my stomach flip. Estimated value, $890,000. Do you want to list high or price to move? She asked. To move, I said. Quietly. We set the list date for the following Monday. That gave us 4 days to get photos, clean up the exterior, and make the listing live while they were still in Europe. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends, not coworkers. Not even the few family members I still spoke to occasionally. This wasn't about drama. It wasn't about getting even. It was about finally seeing things clearly. They had spent years pretending. Pretending the house was theirs. Pretending I was just lucky to be invited back in. Pretending I'd never noticed that everything they built for themselves had been handed to them by me. I'd spent my 20s deferring, yielding, telling myself that dignity was keeping quiet. That family was more important than fairness. That love meant giving without asking. I'd told myself that someday it would even out. But this wasn't uneven anymore. It was theft with a smile. And I was done being polite about it. On Monday morning, the listing went live. Vanessa sent me the link. The photos were beautiful, clean, neutral, flooded with natural light. The kind of place that would sell fast. We had 3 offers by Tuesday. 2 were above asking. 1 was all cash. I accepted that one. The closing process took 10 days. During that time, I didn't hear from my mother. Not a single message, not even a photo from France. The silence felt intentional now. Not forgetfulness, not distraction, just distance. They'd assumed they didn't have to check in. That everything would be waiting when they got back. That I'd keep being the invisible scaffolding holding up their carefully curated life. They didn't know the house was gone. They didn't know they'd called me a burden while the mic was still on. They didn't know I had stopped playing my part. Closing day was a Wednesday. The funds hit my account at 2:34 p.m. I moved the money to a separate account I'd opened that morning under a new LLC. The balance looked surreal on my phone screen. For a moment, I just stared at it, wondering how many years I'd gone without realizing what I was actually worth. I left the house key in a small envelope on the kitchen counter. No note. Just the key. Then I locked the front door behind me and slid a different envelope under it, a printed page with 1 sentence, taped neatly to the glass. Surprise. The burden handled it. They flew back the next day. I know because their car pulled into the driveway at 6:17 p.m., caught on the doorbell camera that's still routed to my phone. I watched as they got out of the car, laughing, bags in hand. She wore a wide-brimmed hat. He was on the phone, probably coordinating their luggage. Neither of them looked concerned. Neither looked like someone who had lost something. Until the key didn't work. I watched her try it again, then rattle the knob. Richard took the envelope from the door, opened it, and just stood there staring. Her expression shifted first, something between confusion and disbelief. Then she looked around. At the house, the driveway, the lawn, and finally up at the camera. I watched her face register what that red light meant. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something. But I didn't stay to hear it. I closed the app, set my phone down, and for the first time in years, I didn't wait for her to call. I didn't call her. Not after the voicemail, not after the doorbell camera caught the moment her world shifted. I knew what the first call would sound like. She'd start out calm, confused, play innocent, then indignant, then the tears, and eventually the guilt, thinly veiled as disappointment. I'd heard it 1,000 times in 1,000 different forms. I didn't need to hear it again. I sat with the silence instead. She texted me once that night. Just a single message. "Rosa, what's going on? Please call." No punctuation at the end. That told me everything. I stared at the screen for a long time before I powered the phone off completely. That night, I went for a walk. Not a long one. Just around the block. The kind you take when your body's been holding tension for too long and doesn't know what to do without it. The air was sharp. Clean. My legs felt strange without urgency behind them. I passed a couple walking a dog, someone dragging a garbage bin to the curb. Everything around me kept going as if nothing had changed. But something had. The next morning, I pulled out the folders. Not the pretty digital ones I kept on my desktop, but the paper versions, worn edges, highlighter marks, scribbled notes from years back. Receipts for everything from pest control to new window trim. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Home insurance documents. Every service contract, every maintenance invoice, every tax return tied to that house. I organized them by year, then by type, then by amount. It took hours, but I wasn't rushing. I wanted to see it all, to feel it. The total came out to just over $142,000. That's how much I'd put into that house over the last 9 years. Not including time, not including labor. Just money, just numbers. I ran the total again. It held. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the sum at the bottom of the spreadsheet. I wasn't shocked. I'd always had a general sense. But seeing it all in black and white, laid bare, indisputable, hit me like a punch to the sternum. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. For years, I'd told myself I was keeping peace. But what I was really doing was disappearing. Making myself smaller to make her feel bigger. Bending over backwards so she never had to reach. Every time she called me the strong one, what she meant was the quiet one. Every compliment had been a muzzle. I thought about every Thanksgiving I drove out early to prep the table while she got ready. Every Christmas where I bought extra gifts and signed both our names. Every phone call where she asked how I was, but didn't wait for the answer before shifting to her next request. And every time I swallowed the words I wanted to say because I knew the fallout wasn't worth it. She'd always been the star. I was just stage crew. That night, Zoe came over. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me takeout and poured wine and sat across from me while I worked through the last of the numbers. When I finally looked up, she gave me the softest look, no pity, just understanding. "You okay?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I'm getting there." She nodded. "You don't owe her an explanation." "I know. You don't owe her anything." "I know that too." But saying it and believing it were two different things. It took time. The next few days were quiet. She didn't try to show up in person. She wouldn't, not with neighbors watching. But the texts kept coming. Then the emails. Then a voicemail from Richard that started with, "Look, we just need to talk like adults," and ended with, "You know we made that place what it is." I deleted it before it finished. The audacity wasn't new, it just hit differently now. I had the papers. The deed. The receipts. The wire confirmation from the buyer's bank. Everything in my name, every dollar accounted for. And yet they still spoke like they were owed something. Like they were victims of some spontaneous betrayal instead of the architects of a long, quiet one. I didn't reply. Not out of malice, but because there was nothing left to say. Any conversation would have been a performance. One I'd rehearsed too many times and was finally refusing to act out again. 3 days later, I got a call from my aunt, my mom's sister. Someone who had always been on the periphery of the drama, observing more than participating. She sounded cautious. "Hey," she said. "I'm not trying to get in the middle of anything. Your mom called me. She's upset. Says you sold the house. Says she doesn't understand." I waited. Then she added, "But I told her I wasn't surprised." That made me pause. She's been calling that place hers for years. I always thought it was weird. I knew it wasn't legally theirs. I just didn't think you'd ever do anything about it. I didn't think I would either, I admitted. "Good for you," she said. Honestly, the words weren't flowery, but they meant more than she probably knew. That weekend, I went out to the coast. Rented a quiet little place for 2 nights. No phone, no laptop. Just a stack of books, a sweater I actually liked, and a beach that didn't care who I used to be. I walked along the water for hours. Watched a kid try to build a sandcastle too close to the tide and laugh as it got washed away. At one point, I sat down, shoes off, jeans rolled up, and let the ocean touch my feet. It was the first time in years I felt still. Not useful. Not needed. Just still. By the time I got home, the emails had stopped. The texts too. I knew they weren't giving up. They were regrouping. Figuring out the next angle. The next version of the story where they were the wounded ones. Where I was the villain. But I didn't feel the need to defend myself anymore. Because deep down I knew the truth. I had given everything. Time. Money. Loyalty. And when I finally asked for nothing in return, just space, just peace, they couldn't even give me that. They called me a burden. So I let them go. The transfer hit my account at 9:41 a.m. on a Thursday. $890,000. Clean. Final. No disputes. No delays. Vanessa sent a text that just said done with a checkmark emoji. I stared at the number for a long time. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence. Like an elevator finally reaching the ground floor after a slow, rattling descent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't even tell Zoe right away. I just shut my laptop, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled in a way I hadn't in years. By noon, I'd packed up the last of my things from the storage unit I'd kept in town. The rest had already been shipped to a new address 2 states away, a rental I'd arranged under a different name through a corporate housing agency. Nothing extravagant, but clean, temporary, quiet. That was the point. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't send a heads up. Just a line on the door in block print. Surprise. The burden handled it. The new owners were moving in that weekend. The place was staged when I left, new throw pillows, plants by the entry, that faint lemon scent real estate agents love. If you walked in, you'd never know a family had spent a decade there without owning it. You'd never know someone else had paid for every tile, every wire, every pipe that made it livable. I changed my number that same day. Canceled my social media accounts. Not deactivated, deleted. Wiped. I left one email open just long enough to send out a handful of quiet goodbyes. Nothing dramatic. Just moving. Staying offline for a while. Be well. If they knew me, they'd understand. If they didn't, they wouldn't notice. By the time my mother and Richard landed back in the country, I was gone. They started calling mutuals. Friends, former coworkers, even my old boss. They left voicemails, sent panic texts. "Have you heard from Rosa? We're locked out of the house. There's been some mistake." There hadn't. No one answered. The people who really knew me? The ones who'd watched this dynamic play out in slow motion for years? They didn't owe them a response. And they knew better than to get involved. A few tried anyway. One of my cousins sent me a DM through a burner account. Just said, "They're freaking out. Did you actually sell it?" I didn't reply. He didn't message again. What surprised me most wasn't the backlash, it was how mild it was. They didn't show up at my office, didn't call the police, didn't take legal action. Because they couldn't. The paperwork was clean. The deed airtight. Everything signed, filed, notarized. They had nothing but their disbelief. And the longer they sat with it, the quieter they got. I imagined them coming home that day, dragging suitcases across the porch, expecting to unlock the door to their usual chaos, the overwatered plants, the dusty table, maybe some lukewarm resentment waiting in the air. I imagined the moment the key didn't turn, the shift in their expressions, the realization blooming slowly, then all at once. The sign on the door, the blank space inside. No photos, no dishes, no furniture, just absence. I didn't need to see it. I'd lived the inverse for years, showing up to a life where I was always extra, never central. Let them feel what I'd felt for a decade. A week after the closing, Vanessa forwarded me a message she'd received from an unknown number. Urgent. We need to speak with Rosa immediately. This has gone too far. She didn't respond. Just sent it to me with a 2-word note, blocking now. I moved into the new place that Friday. It was small, modern. A 1-bedroom with big windows and furniture that didn't creak when you sat down. The kitchen overlooked a quiet street with trees that turned golden in the fall. I unpacked slowly, intentionally. I didn't hang anything up right away. I liked the blank walls. They made me feel unburdened. Zoe visited 2 weeks later. Brought plants. Said the place felt peaceful in a kind of witness protection way. She meant it as a compliment. We didn't talk much about the house. Just about the new life. She helped me build a bookshelf. We drank wine. Watched old movies. It felt like breathing again after years underwater. I started freelancing full-time. Took on fewer clients. Said no more often. I didn't explain my schedule. Didn't overcommit. I made enough to live. That was enough. I started sleeping through the night again. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name, handwritten, in my mother's script. I didn't open it. I kept it for a while, tucked into the back of a drawer with a couple of birthday cards from coworkers and an old photo of me and my dad. I'd open the drawer sometimes just to look at it. Not to read. Just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. It happened. I walked away. 3 months later, I threw it out. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need closure. I'd given myself both. Sometimes people ask if I regret it. If I feel guilty. If I miss her. The truth? I miss the idea of her. The version of her I spent years trying to earn love from. The one I kept believing might wake up one day and say, I see you now. But that version never existed. She was just a mirage, built from scraps of what I needed and what she never gave. And as for guilt? Guilt requires wrongdoing. And walking away from a relationship built entirely on debt isn't betrayal. It's recovery. What I did wasn't revenge. It wasn't payback. It was a decision. One that said, I'm done being useful to people who don't value me. Let them learn what happens when the burden disappears. Let them sit with the silence. It didn't take long for the story to circulate. Quietly, then quickly. At first, it was just a few voicemails, vague and wounded. How could you do this to us? We thought we were family. Then came the accusations. She manipulated us. She took advantage. She was always planning something. They told people I blindsided them. That I sold their home while they were out of the country, as if they'd just gone out for milk and came back to find the house missing. My mother leaned heavily into the narrative. She told her friends I tricked her. That I must have forged something, that I acted out of nowhere, like some unhinged daughter with a vendetta. But the paperwork told a different story. And anyone who asked questions learned that quickly. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't vengeful. I was just done. And when people looked closer, they saw that. I'd documented everything. The title. The tax records. The checks I'd written. The way the house had always been mine, not in theory, but in fact. Mom didn't have answers for that. So she leaned into drama instead. She took our home. She sold our future. Like she hadn't spent years referring to me as a guest in my own property. I heard she cried at church. Told the congregation I was going through something. Asked people to pray for me, like I'd joined a cult or lost my mind. But the sympathy dried up fast. People talk. They compare notes. And when the details didn't match her version, they started to distance themselves. They'd never rented before. Not in my lifetime. They found a place across town, a dated unit in a duplex with faded siding and cracked pavement. My cousin drove past once. Told me the yard was overgrown, the blinds mismatched. No more garden parties. No more holiday dinners with catered trays and coordinated napkins. Just two people sitting in someone else's space for the first time in years. They had to let go of their club membership. No more lake weekends. No more spontaneous getaways booked on my dime. Their friends stopped coming around. Invitations slowed. Everything about their life that once looked full now seemed muted. I wasn't watching to gloat. I wasn't even watching closely. But I heard just enough to know I hadn't imagined it. The way they relied on me. The way they drained me. The way they built an entire lifestyle around the lie that I owed them. It had all been real. And now it was gone. What surprised me most wasn't their fall. It was how quietly it happened. No legal threats. No screaming voicemails. No confrontation. Just silence. They knew. Deep down, they knew. My mother had always assumed she could outtalk the truth. That she could charm or guilt her way around facts. But there's nothing to argue with when the receipts are that clear. When the bank account is no longer hers to touch. When the door no longer opens. So they said nothing. Not to me. But to others? They tried to salvage what they could. They told extended family I was unwell. That I'd snapped. That the stress of city life had finally caught up with me. But the problem with that kind of story is that people have memories. And mine had patterns, long, visible ones. The holidays I covered. The car repair I paid for. The nights I left work early to handle their emergencies. Eventually, people stopped asking. Stopped calling them. Stopped believing them. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't post cryptic quotes online or write dramatic essays about cutting people off. I just lived. For the first time, I lived without constantly calculating someone else's needs before my own. I woke up when I wanted. I cooked for myself. I bought things with no explanation. I spent weekends reading instead of driving out to fix something. I got a dog. A rescue, small, anxious, a little odd-looking. The kind of dog no one picks first. I named her June. She followed me from room to room like she couldn't believe she finally belonged somewhere. It felt familiar. Work slowed down by choice. I shifted into freelance full-time. Smaller clients, fewer hours, enough to support myself comfortably but with space to breathe. I learned how to rest without guilt. How to say no without a spreadsheet to justify it. How to take up space in my own life. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, I'd open the drawer where I kept the old photos. Mom at the stove. Richard in the backyard. Me, younger, holding a paintbrush, touching up siding no one else cared about. I didn't do it to torture myself. I just needed reminders. That it had happened. That it hadn't always been so obvious. People ask if I feel sorry for them. For what they lost. I don't. Because what they lost wasn't stolen. It was returned. Everything they had, the comfort, the image, the security, was borrowed. On my back. With my money. With my silence. I simply stopped lending. And the emptiness that followed? That wasn't my doing. That was theirs. Still, I thought there might come a moment, a card, a knock, an apology. Something. But it never came. Not because they didn't want it. Because they didn't believe they needed to give it. For people like them, accountability is optional. Apologies are currency, only spent if they get you something in return. And I wasn't giving anything anymore. One day, I ran into an old family friend at a bookstore. She recognized me instantly. Hugged me, asked how I'd been. I told her I'd moved. That I was doing well. She hesitated, then asked if I still spoke to my mom. No, I said. We're not in contact. She nodded slowly. She said she doesn't know what happened. That you just disappeared. I smiled politely. I didn't disappear. I just stopped explaining myself. The woman didn't press. She just said, "Good for you," and went back to browsing. That was it. No drama. No gossip. Just truth. And I've learned that truth, real, quiet, unshakable truth, is louder than anything my mother could ever say. It started with a card. No return address. Just my name on the front in handwriting that tried to look casual, but was unmistakably hers. Inside, a generic, thinking of you message the kind you'd find in a drugstore rack between sympathy and congratulations. She'd written a few lines underneath. We've both said things we regret. Let's not let pride get in the way of family. Call me when you're ready to come home. I folded it back up and slid it into the drawer with the others. I didn't feel angry, just tired. A week later, another one arrived. This time routed through my aunt, who had always tried to stay neutral, hovering around the edges, never too close, never too distant. She left it at my door with a note of her own, no pressure, just passing it along. The envelope was thicker. Inside was a letter, 2 full pages, front and back. She said I'd misunderstood, that the call I overheard was taken out of context, that she'd been joking, venting, that she was hurt too and didn't mean any of it, that families say things, and that mine should have never ended like this. She didn't mention the house directly, just danced around it. I don't care about the money. I care about you. But it rang hollow, even on the page. I could hear her voice in every sentence, carefully curated to sound loving, but still centering her pain. There were no real apologies, just vague references to how things went wrong. No ownership, just redirection. I didn't respond. Not because I hated her, but because I finally understood this wasn't about misunderstanding. It never had been. She knew exactly what she said that day, and the truth wasn't in what she claimed afterward. It was in what she hadn't known I'd heard. She didn't know how to love anyone she couldn't control. The third letter came a month later. Thinner. Just 1 page. This one didn't bother with sentiment. She needed help. Richard's hours had been cut. The rent was high. There were medical bills, nothing major, just a little support to get them through a rough patch. She wrote that she knew I was doing well and that maybe I could pitch in, just until they got back on their feet. She didn't say please. She didn't say sorry. Just assumed I'd step in like I always had. I read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a separate envelope from the others. Not to revisit. Just to remember. Because in that moment, any lingering doubt I'd had about whether I'd done the right thing vanished. She hadn't reached out to rebuild. She'd reached out because she'd run out of options. People love to say family is unconditional. That no matter what happens, you should always find your way back. But unconditional love without accountability isn't love. It's enabling. And I had spent enough of my life being the safety net for people who refused to look down. After that, the letters stopped. The aunt dropped by once more. Asked if I wanted to talk. Said my mother missed me. I asked her, calmly, if my mom had ever once admitted to anything specific. Had she said the words, I was wrong, or I used you, or even just, I hurt you? She shook her head. Then there's nothing to talk about, I said. It wasn't bitterness. It was just boundaries. That was the thing no one understood until I spelled it out. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was the first time in my life I was protecting myself instead of trying to prove myself. And protecting yourself isn't cruel. It's necessary. I spent the next year quietly building a life that felt like mine. I kept things small. Intentional. June, the rescue pup, became my shadow. I took her on long walks. I planted herbs on the windowsill. I started cooking real meals, ones that didn't come from boxes or exist solely to keep me moving. Zoe visited regularly. We developed a rhythm. She knew when to ask questions and when to just show up with wine and silence. I got a part-time teaching gig at a community center, small business planning for women transitioning out of unstable housing. I didn't talk about my own past, but I recognized pieces of myself in every story I heard. One afternoon, a woman in her late 40s, sharp, tired, fiercely determined, stayed after class to ask about LLC formation. We talked through logistics. Before she left, she said, I'm just tired of being useful to people who never saw me. The words stopped me. I nodded. I get it. You ever get past that? She asked. That kind of hurt? You don't get past it, I said. You grow around it. But one day, it doesn't control you anymore. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just true. That summer, I got a postcard from someone I used to work with. Just a quick hello, asking if I was still off the grid. I smiled reading it. I didn't feel off the grid. I felt grounded. A few months later, Zoe and I drove out to the coast again. Same spot I'd gone to the week I left. This time, the beach wasn't quiet. Families were everywhere. Kids running through the tide, someone strumming a guitar near a driftwood log. We sat with iced coffee, watching the sky shift from pale blue to soft gold. Think she'll ever stop trying? Zoe asked. She already did, I said. She just doesn't know it yet. That's what happens when people run out of leverage. They don't change. They fade. And the ones who used to feel like the center of your universe? Eventually, they're just a silence you no longer try to fill. I didn't hate her. I wasn't hoping for karma. I just no longer needed her to be different in order for me to be free. And that was everything. It's been over a year now. The dust has settled. The voicemails stopped months ago. The letters too. I don't know where they're living now, and I don't need to. Maybe they scraped together enough for another rental. Maybe they leaned on someone else for a while. Either way, they found a new version of the story to tell, one where I'm the villain and they're the victims of some cruel twist. They're welcome to it. I don't argue anymore. I don't correct the record. I let people believe what they need to believe to sleep at night. Because I no longer feel responsible for managing other people's comfort, not even hers. Especially not hers. After the temporary rental, I bought a place of my own. A small house with a yard and enough quiet to hear myself think. Nothing flashy. Just clean lines, natural light, and a door that locks from the inside. I keep it simple on purpose. No debt. No shared names on paperwork. No shared anything. It's mine. Fully. Quietly. Entirely. And that kind of ownership, the kind built without apology or compromise, feels like the first real thing I've ever had. I painted the front door myself. Not because I had to, but because I could. Chose a color that made me feel calm every time I came home. I planted a lemon tree in the backyard. It hasn't produced fruit yet. But it will. Eventually. Peace works like that. It doesn't arrive all at once. It grows slowly, quietly. Like roots under soil. June has a spot by the window she's claimed as hers. Every morning she watches the neighborhood wake up, mail trucks, kids on bikes, someone jogging past in the same blue sweatshirt every day. Sometimes I sit beside her, coffee in hand, no rush to go anywhere. It's a small life. But it's mine. Zoe still comes by. More often now. She's seen the shift in me, the way I hold myself differently, the way I pause before saying yes to anything. She doesn't say it out loud, but I think she's proud. Not because I cut people off, but because I finally stopped bleeding for people who never noticed. We still don't talk much about my mother. There's not much left to say. Last I heard, through a second-hand whisper at a family event I didn't attend, my mom told someone she doesn't know what she did to deserve this. That she's tried everything. I believe her. She probably did try. But trying isn't the same as changing. And sometimes, people don't want to heal a relationship. They just want to reset it to the last version where they had control. I'm not available for that anymore. I used to think forgiveness was something you owed people. Especially family. That to move on, you had to mend, even if the other person hadn't done the work. I don't believe that now. Forgiveness, for me, has been something quieter. It's looked like not checking their social media. Not asking mutuals for updates. Not rehearsing arguments in my head when I can't sleep. It's looked like peace. The kind of peace you build, brick by brick, when no one is watching. The kind that isn't loud or performative, but steady. Lived in. That's my legacy now. Not the house I sold. Not the money I moved. But the life I built from scratch after walking away. Because here's the truth, you don't owe anyone your silence just because they raised you. You don't owe anyone a second chance just because they share your blood. And you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if they called it love. Sometimes justice doesn't come through confrontation or a big reveal. Sometimes it doesn't show up in a courtroom or a dramatic family reunion. Sometimes justice looks like a lock that no longer turns. A key that doesn't fit. A door that stays closed. And the quiet that follows? That's not revenge. That's relief. That's freedom. That's legacy. I don't know if she ever drives past the old house. I don't know if she ever wonders who lives there now, if the new owners hung new curtains, if they repainted the walls, if they noticed the hairline crack in the hallway ceiling that I always meant to fix, but never got around to. I hope she does. Not out of spite, but because maybe, in that moment, staring at what used to be hers, knowing it never really was, she'll understand what it means to lose something that was never given, only taken. And maybe, just maybe, she'll remember the version of me that stayed quiet for too long. And realize I'm not that version anymore. Because the burden? She's gone. And she's not coming back. If you've ever had to walk away from people who thought you never would, how did it feel? Was it peace? Was it grief? Or maybe both? Let me know in the comments. And if this story hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more true stories about setting boundaries, choosing yourself, and finding freedom, even when it's hard.